In 2017, Universal Studios announced the birth of a new shared universe of monster movies, bringing their classic horror icons into the contemporary franchise film landscape. But after the critical and financial failure of its first installment, the project was indefinitely abandoned. Now, in 2022, the powers that be have called upon one pulp horror devotee and one snarky film critic to unearth the concept. I'm Dylan Roth.
And I'm Dalton DeShane.
Are you afraid of the dark universe? Hello and welcome to Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe? This is the podcast where we revisit the concept of a shared universe of Universal monster movies and try to take that concept into the future, planning years and years of film and perhaps television of a hypothetical Universal horror movie universe.
Yes, it's a daunting task, but we are the two people that I think are best equipped to handle it. And I mean, that's borne out by the fact that we were asked to do this. There is kind of a story here. Now, Dylan, I believe someone reached out to you about this project.
Oh, yeah. I heard from a studio executive at Universal who would prefer to remain nameless.
Because we wouldn't do this ourselves. This idea is too stupid. That
we would never
devote the time and resources to this.
To be clear, neither of us thinks the idea of doing a dark universe is like a great idea. There's a reason this... All right, well, we'll get to it. Every attempt that every studio has made to reproduce the sort of, the quote-unquote magic of the Marvel Universe has crashed and burned. The DC Extended Universe is a mess. The Dark Universe died.
What about the Monsterverse? The Monsterverse is going strong.
The Monsterverse is it?
It's still happening.
Okay, and listen, Godzilla vs. Kong fucking did rock, but...
I'm sure in the process of this podcast, we will get into the pluses and minuses of all of the various shared universe projects, because we must learn from them in this endeavor. But we would never devote all our time and resources to a stupid project like this unless we were making the big bucks. So, right. Yes, you were saying.
Universal read many of my very, very popular and well-received film reviews and understood that I was someone with his fingers on the pulse of the community.
Yes. Dylan is a professional film reviewer.
I am a professional film critic. I'm freelance. I'm for hire. But of course, I no longer need the money because now we have been hired by the big dogs to take on the crazy task. They came to me and they asked me to line up a concept for the next version of the Dark Universe because they haven't given up. This is where the money is.
Well, they're seeing, now that they see that Marvel is extending into phase 6, they're like, oh, this isn't just a fad. This is going to keep going. And so we need to really give it the old college try again and fix the mistakes of the first time.
Right. This is the only way that movies will get made in the future.
Yes. And Universal, we got rides to make, you know, for the theme park.
And frankly, no one's all that excited about Peacock. I'm going to share with you a crazy statistic that I was going to tell you before the show. So, Dalton, you and I watched Halloween Kills together last Halloween on Peacock. Because it was available without ads, even on the ad level, still without commercial interruption from some airline or whatever, right? So everybody had the option to see that movie at home during a pandemic for like $6, and Halloween Kills still made $97 million in the domestic box office. That is how uninterested people are in signing up for Peacock.
Yeah.
So.
And how interested they are in going to the cinema for legacy horror characters. So, cha-ching, cha-ching, baby.
Right. So we are here to set the stage for the next era of corporate entertainment.
Yes.
With iconic characters you know and love, to drive people to theaters and streaming subscriptions going forward. We have been assigned to design the entirety of the Universal equivalent to the Infinity Saga, to Marvel's Infinity Saga.
Yes,
they want the whole thing worked out in advance.
Beyond, if we can negotiate a little extra moolah for that.
All depends on how this goes, right? All depends on how you listeners respond, and whether or not we're able to work out the situation together. Because what I didn't want to tell Universal when they approached me for this is, I really don't know horror movies very well. It's actually my biggest blind spot in terms of like mainstream film genres.
You're mostly
Hollywood.
A sci-fi guy.
I love science fiction, right? Space sci-fi is my bread and butter. I love Star Trek and Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, and I like your conventional dramas. I like historical dramas. I like comedy. I like just about every other genre of narrative film except for horror movies. I'm actually fairly on the outside of this. So I talked them into subcontracting out my person I know who is the biggest horror movie buff, which is my friend from the music scene, Dalton DeShane, horror writer, songwriter and leader of Dalton DeShane and the Traveling Show, writer of such horror comics as Monocle and such horror novels as Dalton DeShane and the Traveling Show. I thought we would make a good team for this project.
Yes. As you mentioned, we know each other through the music scene here in New York City. But we are also media buffs together. We have seen many movies together. And we've shared our passions. You've shown me some Star Trek. I've shown you some horror. And so we thought we would bounce off each other well for this. So the thing that Universal really wants is they don't want another The Mummy 2017 on their hands, which was a flop, which is why the Dark Universe was canceled. And so instead of kind of flying by the seat of their pants and just kind of trying to build this thing as they go, trying to build the plane as it takes off, they want us to map out everything in advance. And I mean everything. So what we're going to do on this podcast is every episode, we're going to plan another movie. And that includes casting it, choosing a director and possibly screenwriter, really building the team behind it, and then pitching that film to each other, full plot synopsis, and planning how this universe takes shape. And then the other, we'll kind of collaborate and refine the idea from there. Basically, like you said, building our Infinity Saga, our first 3 phases, like the moon, like the Wolfman.
The Wolfman. I wonder if that's someone we'll be talking about more later. So, like Dalton said, we are not looking to start again with The Mummy. In fact, it's been mandated for us that in order to maintain the continuity and integrity of the Dark Universe brand, the one and only Dark Universe film that is officially part of that canon, The Mummy 2017, directed by Alex Kurtzman, is still canon. It is still a jumping off point. It is something that we have to incorporate into our world. So whatever we make going forward has to in some way, shape, or form be a sequel to The Mummy. So that's what we kind of have as our ground rules. We were supposed to use some of the framework that they created. They announced a couple features before they quietly buried the Dark Universe as an idea. But The Mummy is still our sort of Iron Man, our first sort of example of what the universe is. And I put it to you, Dalton. I should save this thought for later. Let's just talk about.
I have some ideas too. I have some ideas. Well, and what's important to note is that we both accepted this job without having actually seen The Mummy. Neither of us had seen any. I was about to say any of the Dark Universe films, but any of the one Dark Universe films until about 2 hours ago.
Yes, we just sat down to watch The Mummy together before we sat down for this podcast, where we're going to talk about kind of figuring out what works, what doesn't work about it, what we can incorporate in our universe. But yeah, neither of us had watched it because why would we? Honestly, it's everything that you've heard about this movie is 100% true.
Yes,
it's a fucking nothing film.
I maintain, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I maintain there is a lot of usable stuff in there for us to build off of. But yes, the idea is definitely going to be to improve on this going forward. We want, unlike Iron Man for the MCU, we want this to be our Incredible Hulk, where, yes, it is technically still canon, but maybe not the one you want to watch when you're going back to the beginning.
Want it to be a skippable early chapter.
So we just watched this just before this taping, experienced it live together. We've tried not to talk about it because we wanted to save our thoughts here. We are not going to be recapping The Mummy 2017 for you. This is not a recap podcast. This is a creative podcast. I'm sure if you want to know what happens in the 2017 Mummy in detail, I mean, obviously we'll be touching on a lot of stuff, but I'm sure there are a lot of bad movie podcasts out there that go through it. There's probably YouTube review videos, lots of snarky letterboxd reviews.
The pity of it though is that I don't even feel like there's that much specific stuff to rip into with this movie. It's not like it's so batshit insane that it's bad. I feel like that would have been better. It's just a big gray mess, and that's both visually and that sort of very generic gray CGI like muck kind of aesthetic that it has.
Yeah.
And also that the characters are all very nondescript and uninteresting. And the mythology is not all that curious or deep, especially considering this was supposed to be the movie that seeded the mythology that we're now tasked with expanding.
Right.
There's not a whole lot there to dig your teeth into, even just to be an asshole about it.
Which honestly, thank God, because that gives us room to come up with our own
it's
shit.
It's a blessing, as it turns out.
We don't have to, there's not like a strict rule book we have to follow just yet. It's a lot of vague stuff. But let's get into it. I mean, I think you can definitely see the DNA of Iron Man in this movie. Not in a way that works.
No, but in that sort of superficial way where it's like, all right, what do the people like about Iron Man? Well, they have a big star, in that case, a big being like rehabilitated star.
Yes.
Who is kind of an asshole, right? Who you want to see redeemed over time.
They were definitely putting all their money on Tom Cruise being the Robert Downey Jr. of the Dark Universe and being sort of your through line. And the character is superficially very similar in that you've got this, he's basically an asshole. Mm-hmm. He's a womanizing asshole, except where Robert Downey Jr. has charm and clever writing and is a likable asshole, Tom Cruise's character is nothing.
Joe, he just sucks. That's the only thing that there is about him. There's nothing else.
Well, I think this is Tom Cruise's worst performance, and I don't think it's his fault. I think it definitely feels like in this movie, the director just kept giving him the note like, you're funny. Your character is funny. He's a funny guy. He's charming. He's funny. But there are no jokes for him to say. There's nothing. So like he keeps like saying everything very irreverently, but it just makes him a just sort of gaping void of a character where you have he's definitely trying to be that like, oh, I'm an asshole in a cool way, but like he's not saying. I mean, there's
nothing. There are no jokes. We're talking about like there's a bit. The first kind of sort of bit that they establish is because he's also attached to a just as blank of a character that's supposed to be his love interest in the film, character by the name of Jenny Halsey, who I think is supposed to be a character that recurs in this series. She's played by Annabelle Wallis of *Malignant*. She's also...
she was in *Malignant*.
Yeah, she's also the...
You caught that and I didn't, and I'm supposed to be the horror guy.
She's also the voice of the Discovery computer on Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, okay, so...
She did a Star Trek. We got a couple people in this film who have done a Star Trek. So she is like an archaeologist working for this spooky company that we'll get into later, but she's also... Her character quality is... I have no idea she's...
Her character quality,
I guess she's professional, kind of?
She is to give exposition, is to be knowledgeable about the things the audience needs to know, and to have been fucked by Tom Cruise.
Right. So they had sex sometime before the movie started. And the way that we introduce this idea is that Sergeant Nick Morton, Tom Cruise's character, who is hanging out with a sort of comic relief Joe character called Vale, played by the New Girl's Jake Johnson. This confused me to no end, by the way, because Jake Johnson's most famous character is from the New Girls named Nick, and Tom Cruise's character in this is Nick. So that's neither here nor there. It's not their fault. It's just annoying to me because I keep wanting to call his character Nick. So they are supposed to be working for the U.S. Army in some kind of vague capacity, but they are shirking their duties in order to try and do some crypt diving and, quote, liberate, but actually steal various ancient artifacts from underneath Iraq.
They're double dipping on the colonialism. They're both being literally, in a military sense, colonial occupiers, and then also pillaging the loot and treasure from said country.
But Jenny Halsey's job is to also steal these relics from the Middle East, but for good reasons, because it turns out that she works for a sort of secret cabal that protects the world from ancient magical evils.
Which we need to talk about Prodigium.
That's going to be a big part of our show.
We're going to have to fix Prodigium.
But we do have to get back to the joke. Let's just close this loop. They introduce the dynamic, which is that she implies to Nick Morton's commanding officer that their sex was very brief. And he has to defend himself from that accusation.
It's a very obvious, just D-level joke. It's just like you came fast.
And they come back to it.
It may be the only joke
it's
they
the
tell
only
in the
joke,
movie.
and it's like one of those things where we we actually kind of expected it to come back at the end of the movie in a point where it might have been funny and they didn't do it.
No.
That's their whole thing is, so the two of them met at some point, had a fling. He ran off with her map to a treasure. And now they have to work together to solve this problem. But they're also, because the plot kind of demands it, they fall in love. But there's nothing really interesting or nice about either of them. And not even in a way where like, well, here's two boring, pretty people, I guess, that should like each other. There's nothing. And I would have thought that, I would previously have said that Tom Cruise could have chemistry with a paper bag. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing here.
There's nothing
Absolutely
here.
Nothing.
And that's the other thing I was thinking about was him and Jake Johnson, because I think there is a potential for good chemistry there. But again, there's no writing to support it. Because every line of dialogue besides the 15-second sex line in this film is exposition.
That's true.
And so nobody has any personality. So I think, again, this is good for us because there is a skeleton here with some very basic rules and a lot of blanks to fill in. It's funny, though, again, going back to the Iron Man comparison, is that at the end of this movie, he gets an Tony Stark Endgame moment, which this movie came out before Endgame, but he does the thing of like being held literally by the neck by the enemy who has a dagger with a magic stone in it. Her weapon is literally a weapon powered by a stone. And, Tom Cruise is being held by the neck and, does his little sleight of hand and gets it away from her and has like a quippy line about it. Instead of like I am Iron Man.
She's like, you're a thief. And he's like, yeah, because that's his personality.
His personality
is the one thing from him earlier, right? Yes, I hadn't even actually thought about how specific that was. But obviously that's a coincidence.
It's a coincidence because Endgame came out later, but it's eerie how similar that resolution to his arc in this movie. And the big thing that we should let you know in case you haven't seen the movie is that the movie ends with Tom Cruise being the new mummy. He is given the powers of the mummy.
The film's main antagonist is a different mummy whose name I have to look up because I cannot retain a fucking thing from this film. Almanet is her name.
Yes.
And she's played by Sofia Boutella, who also did a Star Trek. She plays Jayla in Star Trek Beyond, which you have not seen.
No.
And so she was the crown princess of Egypt at some point, and then when her father had a son with some new wife.
I'm going to stop you here because this backstory is worthless. First of all,
okay, all right.
No, and also they tell it to you so many times.
Yes, it has a problem. The movie has 2 prologues. And all of the information in both of those prologues is given to you later in the context of the film, and it would be more interesting there. But here's where I want to get into.
Yes.
The Mummy, one of the reasons why it is so forgettable is that it is about nothing.
Yeah.
It has no message, no themes, and no real, depth of character. And what sucks is that there's almost something, because you think the idea is, all right, they've done a twist on the Mummy, right? We think about the Mummy originally. It's a lady mummy, and it's part of her story. It's important that she was passed over for the throne by an infant boy.
Yes.
And she had been promised power and then was denied it when it became possible to give power to a man instead.
She hit the glass ceiling.
Something that happens, it's a thing that you could play with if this movie was interested in playing with anything.
Yeah.
Right? It makes her not sympathetic because then she murders a baby.
Yes.
She kills her father, her stepmother, and her baby brother in a pact with the god of death, Set, to become an immortal living god and to bring Set back to the mortal plane in the body of her lover. She's foiled after committing these murders. They kill her chosen, who's supposed to become the body of Set. They bury her underneath a rock because they specifically want to get her out of Egypt, which explains because we haven't invaded Egypt yet. So we can't do the story there, apparently.
Yes.
But by the end of the film, so she curses Nick Morton, Tom Cruise's character, so he can't be killed or anything. His body has to remain so that she can implant in him, by stabbing him with this dagger, the soul and spirit of Set, the god of death. When the film is ended, through his little switcheroo with the gem, Tom Cruise stabs himself with the dagger, which still gives him the power of Set, but because he is so desperately in love with this woman he met last week, with whom he has no chemistry, he's able to overcome the magical thrall of Set and become the mummy, but retain his own will. And he'll be battling the darkness within through the future as he searches for a cure. And that's where we leave this character. He's wandering the desert with his now reanimated friend, Jake Johnson. And he's going to try and find a way to rid himself of the soul of the god of death, which he can control because I guess it's convenient for us that he does.
It is important to note that Tom Cruise now has the ability to bring anyone dead back to life, which is a pretty massive power to be dealing with in our universe.
We have to keep him very far from the plot whenever possible.
Well, yeah, we got to find some way to... Because if we just let him do that willy-nilly, obviously all of our stakes disappear. Mm-hmm. Although this does bring me to the first idea I had.
Hit me, Dalton.
First, actually, going back a little bit, I do want to say I want the number one rule for our franchise to be no opening with exposition dumps. Because it is brutal. For the first film in your franchise, it opens with Russell Crowe doing a 10-minute voiceover just telling you the story of the mummy. Again, completely unnecessarily, because all of this will come out during the movie. But instead, it robs all of the tension from the later mummy scenes because you already know what happened and all of the backstory. And also, it's boring when they tell you right at the beginning because you have no investment.
Right.
You're not invested.
It's an early indication that this has no interest in being a horror movie because there's no suspense in the sense of mystery. There's no unknown. We know all of the rules and how it happened. And there's a complete lack of suspense or tension in a narrative sense. And then there's I don't think any of the horror elements of the film are terribly suspenseful or directed in that way either. But it tells you right from the get-go, we're not building a mystery here. There is nothing about... Horror should be about, you can either take something that's mundane and make it scary, or you can take something can create a threat that's otherworldly or unknown. Yeah. And I've always kind of argued that a horror movie stops being a horror movie as soon as you know how to kill the monster.
Right.
As soon as you feel like you have, you know how Alien is a horror movie and Aliens is an action movie, and that's because by the time you get to Aliens, well, she's killed one of these, right? So when you stand a chance, when you know how to win, well, now you're in sort of an action scenario, right? This movie never has a sort of sense of what's unknown, or the threat's never impossible. It never seems all that scary because you know everything from the get-go.
I agree. I think we need to bring a lot more mystery to this franchise, which is I'm gonna get to with Prodigium as well, because I think Prodigium also ruins any horror.
Okay, let's introduce Prodigium to the audience.
So Prodigium, we are introduced at the very beginning to Russell Crowe's character, Henry, later revealed to be Dr. Jekyll. And he appears to be in charge of some secret, possibly government organization. I don't think it's ever explicitly said, but that is hunting monsters and evil. They're hunting evil is what they say.
The concept of evil, which he equates to sort of a disease trying to penetrate the membrane of our reality.
Yes. And for some reason, a man who turns evil every couple hours has been put in charge of all of this entire operation.
Well, sometimes it takes a monster to defeat a monster.
That's true. That's the last line of the movie. It's rough because I also think, as you said, horror is the unknown. I think the less we know, the better as far as scares go. I wrote down in my notes, it's horror, not lorer, which is really bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
But I think Prodigium is kind of the ultimate. I think another thing that is scary is ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, people that don't understand this. As soon as your characters are people that are on top of everything and they know how to capture the mummy and inject her with mercury so that she's powerless and they know what they're doing, I think the relatability goes out the window because you're not looking at yourself on screen anymore. You're looking at a military stand-in or a CIA stand-in or a superhero kind of stand-in.
Right, which is obviously what they wanted to do here.
Right.
They want to do this sort of horror-tinged superhero universe because they're hewing too close to trying to do the MCU.
Which I think we do need to figure out what the tone of our franchise is going to be because I think it does need to be more horror. Obviously, absolutely. I would say that. But it is a blockbuster franchise.
Yes.
And so I don't think it's not going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? I think it does. I think action elements are important. I think humor is important. I also am of the firm belief that humor does not weaken horror. I think it actually strengthens it. I think
the best horror movies are all also funny.
I thought the sequence, one of the things I really liked was there's a sequence where Tom Cruise is fighting the mummies like zombie slaves. And every time he hits them, he punches through them and gets stuck. And I thought that was actually a really funny kind of sequence where like he keeps fighting and his leg gets stuck, his arms get stuck. Like I think that stuff can actually still work in a scary context as well. Like I don't think slapstick and horror are enemies. I think they can work well together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it needs to be scary, but it needs to be scary in, I mean, the other person doing, blockbuster horror is also for Universal, Jordan Peele, where his movies are not overly intense. They're not Saw. They're not like, for horror diehards. They're for a wide audience, and still manage to be scary. But like, I'm not going to give any Nope spoilers, but like there were 1 or 2 sequences in Nope that I found to be like actually scary. And a lot of it was just like more of a thriller kind of vibe than being explicitly nonstop terror.
It's less visceral and more cerebral.
Yes.
And I think that I do want to get Tone, but I want to make sure you get through the point you wanted to talk about fixing the protogeum as an idea. Because this is clearly supposed to be the shield of this universe.
Is our shield, yeah.
But part of the trouble is it kind of makes our job easier, but there are so many sort of one-to-one obvious we're trying to do exactly what Marvel did that we can choose to discard or to follow, right? But we have our shield. What is wrong with that? Or rather, we talked about what's wrong with it. You had an idea how to fix it. I want to hear about it.
I have sort of 3 core ideas for the future of the series, and one of them has to do with Prodigium. And I think the problem with Prodigium, like I said, is that it gives us too much, and it puts our characters in too high of a position of power over... It gives them too much knowledge. It gives them too many resources. We're never going to feel like our characters are the underdogs if they're working for this massive agency, and we're not going to see ourselves in them. And I think it's going to defeat some of the horror. So the thing is that we actually have a pretty good template for organizations like this inside the horror trope world, which is that of the Men in Black. And I don't mean like Men in Black like the movie, although sort of. The Men in Black film is based on a sort of cryptid tangential idea of anonymous men who sort of show up at times of bizarre goings on. You don't know if they're government, if they're extraterrestrial, this sort of unknown interloper, well-dressed in a suit that sort of comes in and disappears.
Right. They're the man that comes in and cleans up the stories that no one believes you after it's over. They're not the protagonist of the story. They're more of they're a device to reset for everybody but our protagonists. So the world can move on and nobody else gets to learn the rules so that they can be enlightened and be in less danger in the next story.
And I think even going to like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Marvel universe, I think S.H.I.E.L.D. even worked best after it was dissolved. And it was like, Nick Fury showing up in your apartment, on his own. And the sort of making it more of a mysterious kind of, you don't know who's good, who's bad kind of thing. So I think my idea is we get Dr. Jekyll out of Prodigium. We say, I want to throw that in.
Russell Crowe as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is actually the one thing about this movie I genuinely like. I think his performance is really fun.
Yeah.
And I think the idea, as ridiculous as it is, we have to be comfortable with ridiculous ideas, right? We're doing stories about mummies and vampires and reanimated monsters, right? I think the idea of the leader of this, that the person assigned with solving the problem is also the problem, is something that you can definitely play with on a thematic level.
Yeah.
And I think that his performance is great. Like, I think we're actually barred from recasting any characters that are already in the films, so we wouldn't anyway. I actually really do want him to stick around and just to remain a part of our narrative.
Yeah, I think we can definitely keep him. I'm not throwing him out.
But you want him out of Prodigium.
My pitch is, first of all, I think we keep things in real time. So our next movie happens 5 years after the events of The Mummy or whatever. So there's going to be a time jump. Due to his transformation at a critical time during this thing, he has been removed by some mysterious board of Prodigium as a member of the group, which leaves him without resources, with limited access to the drug that keeps him as Jekyll, because he doesn't have the unlimited resources of Prodigium, and kind of casts him down onto the same level as maybe he has more knowledge because he used to be in there. He knows Prodigium is out there, but it's kind of the thing of like, he can't even get in touch with them anymore. He doesn't know where they are. He doesn't know any names there. Like they've moved on from him. I think the interesting thing I picked up on with Dr. Jekyll to play with is that he was ready to kill Tom Cruise before he was Mr. Hyde, which I think shows that he is a bloodthirsty, or at least a ruthless person, even before he's Mr. Hyde. So
they make a point of that. Yeah, they say there's a moment in the film where Tom Cruise is cursed, so that when he gets stabbed with this dagger, he will become Set. And Dr. Jekyll's plan is to stab him, but while he's under their control, and then just incinerate the body immediately, so they get to kill him and end the threat of Set at the same time. Mm-hmm. What Mr. Hyde wants to do is to cooperate with Set, and both of them live as living gods and run rampant. So obviously the ends that Hyde is looking for are not great also. But there is definitely the idea that Dr. Jekyll is not to be trusted on a personal level. He doesn't ever lie about it though. He's kind of really, he's sort of dead already. I don't see what the problem is.
I think it's two kinds of evil, right? He's sort of the pragmatic, banal evil, right? He is the evil of governments. He is the evil of greater good, right? Mm-hmm. And then Hyde is the more chaotic evil, which is what we accept as more evil. He's the criminal one. He is the one plotting to buck convention, right, while the other one is evil in the service of convention.
Well, that works because the idea of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is ultimately not really what is separating the parts of a person that are good and evil, but the parts that are acceptable and are unacceptable, mm-hmm, right? There isn't really a way, although this movie kind of implies that he's been infected by the idea of evil. The more interesting take on Jekyll and Hyde has more to do with social expectations, mm-hmm, and the barriers of society, and what about you is considered to be safe and proper, and what parts of you are considered to be dark and subversive.
Which I think is what we play with maybe as we see him is, okay, now we've pulled out the rug from Dr. Jekyll. He's on his own. He's lost his purpose of, chasing down evil, or at least in the way that he used to. Now he has to sort of face, well, what is the difference between him and Hyde? And gives us a kind of an interesting place to go with that. And then with Prodigium, we turn them back into the mysterious men in black. And they're not heroes of our story. We don't see the inner workings. We just see them as peripheral interlopers, almost extraterrestrial in origin. I mean, as you know, I'm a big fan of the Mothman mythos.
He's wearing the hat right now, folks.
Oh, I am wearing the Mothman hat. There's a figure in the Mothman mythos named Indrid Cold, who appears in the film The Mothman Prophecies. So you hear his voice, sort of. And he was sort of a man in black that accompanied the Mothman's appearance, except Indrid Cold was an extraterrestrial, or at least claimed to be, from a planet called Lanulos. And so he would appear to be like working on behalf of the government, but his clothes didn't fit quite right. His skin didn't quite look right. He was sort of an otherly kind of figure. And I think we could kind of play with that sort of mystery. Like maybe there's something more to Prodigium than we were shown in the first one. Maybe, Jekyll was only controlling a specific arm of it, but there is a larger play here that maybe allows us to get into some extraterrestrial horror, but in sort of I think we use them very sparingly, as sort of an outside force that is shaping things in ways our characters don't understand. Instead of being exposition central.
Okay, I completely agree with that. I kind of want them out of the way. I don't want our protagonists attached to them, and I'm going to put this other sort of grander idea about the design of the universe to you as well. I think that we should consider a model in which the protagonists of each film, the non-starring monster characters, are presumably at least one-off characters who do not recur, and that we can kind of just decide to pick here and there which ones we want to carry on. So that mm-hmm. If we're trying to make them more like horror movies, then we want protagonists who are less in the know than the audience. We want them to be in maximum danger.
We want the audience to believe they could die.
Yes, that's part of it. And so I think on the sort of metatextual level of this, I would like to be casting the non-main monster characters with people on single film contracts.
Yeah.
I don't know how much corporate is going to like that in terms of like star building it, but I think that the idea, especially on the sort of cynical studio level, the stars, even now, the stars are not the actors. The stars are the characters because the characters are owned by the studio. And the stars they really want to elevate here are not Nick Morton. Fucking can't retain the name of this character, the movie I watched a fucking hour ago. It's the Mummy, or it's Frankenstein, or Frankenstein's monster, or it's Dracula, right? We, at the end of the day, Laurie Strode, as much as we love Laurie Strode, she's not, her face is not the poster for Halloween.
No.
That's Michael Myers.
It's Michael Myers. Yeah.
So that's what we have to keep in mind here. I think we build this universe, we build this brand around the monsters, but they are not the leads of our film. They are the center of our film, and then maybe when we get to our big Avengers style crossover, it has more to do with them. But I think the individual installments, it's more important for them to be everyday people who can die and maybe won't come back.
And I think this was something that I wanted to bring up with you, is the approach to using these characters, because they're not heroes, they're not superheroes, and it seems like maybe what they wanted to do by turning Tom Cruise into the Mummy at the end of this one is make a good monsters versus bad monsters kind of thing.
It sure seems that way.
And I don't know that that's what we want to do. It seems like the approach we more want to take is sort of a monsterverse kind of approach, where we are watching human characters who are involved with the villains or anti-heroes or these more powerful beings, and then just kind of keep getting roped into this larger thing going on beyond them, right?
Exactly.
But like, we're not going to make a Dracula movie where Dracula's the hero. We're going to make a movie about ordinary people,
right, who have to survive Dracula. And in the process, we can reveal more about what's going on with Dracula, so that next time we come back to Dracula with a new set of characters, we're also picking up his story about what role he plays in the grander design of our story.
I think we do have some opportunities to play with some anti-hero stuff. Like, I think the most obvious monster for a non-villain capacity is Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I think Frankenstein you could really build as the soul of your series. And it's sort of in the way Captain America was. Not that we need Frankenstein to be Captain America, but in the way that, like, he was the one people connected with emotionally, is like, this is, you wanted to root for him. I think you can want to root for Frankenstein as sort of the innocent one in this.
Well, there's a part of the whole idea of the universal monsters as we have known to love them over the course of a century that's completely missing from this movie, which it is that Frankenstein thing where it's that monsters represent sort of an outsiderdom part of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We're rooting, and this is true in other slasher monsters as well. You're rooting for the heroes, but you're also relating to the monsters. It's one of the reasons we get their point of view some of the time. It's not just about creating the suspense of having the monster POV. There's also a degree to which horror fans are weirdos, right? And horror fans relate to the monsters in weird ways. And one of the things that just sucks about this movie is that they give the Mummy, they give the Sofia Boutella Mummy, an anchor on which you could connect to her as sort of somebody who has been separated from power and agency, or someone who has been promised something by society and then had that promise denied. There is an opportunity to, if you're going to, you don't necessarily have to make a character, change a character's gender with the intent of making a statement about gender. You don't have to do that. You can just have a character be whatever gender and let them be any kind of character. Any actor should be able to play any type of personality of character, hero, villain, blah, blah, blah. Demographics, you shouldn't be required to represent your gender or sexuality or race or blah, 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 right? But they plant the seed for something here.
Yeah.
For her to be sympathetic on a systemic level that a lot of people in the audience would be able to understand. They don't do anything with it. And I think it's important for these monsters to be the idea that this universe is set up with the idea that there is a single sort of being that is evil, that is trying to infiltrate our world, and that, like, Set is also the devil, is also, they don't name any others, but this idea of this sort of unified gods, unified theory of evil God.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that we have to maybe a little bit figure out where monster and evil live together and where monster and outcast live together. And figure out those are our sort of sides.
Yeah,
if we're going to do monster versus monster.
And I agree. I think each monster will have its own shades of that. Like obviously, if you've got sort of a spectrum with like Frankenstein sort of on one end as maybe a more innocent and least evil maybe of our monsters, and then let's say, for the sake of argument, Dracula on the other end. And I think there is you do have to be careful with this because one thing we haven't talked about yet is Dracula Untold, which we also have both watched, which was originally intended to be the first film in the Dark Universe before Universal downplayed it and sort of then said The Mummy was the first one. But I think Dracula Untold the entire purpose of that film is misguided because it tries to humanize Dracula too much. It tries to be like, no, he was just a good guy that had to be evil to save his wife, and he's just a wife guy. He's just a love. He had to do it, and it makes you sympathize with Dracula in a way that I think takes the teeth out of Dracula, I think it sort of defangs him.
Yeah. It thoroughly misunderstands the character and like what makes him interesting in the novel and classic film interpretation.
Right. Now The Mummy though has more room for that because I would say out of the original classic monsters, the original Mummy is a character that is entirely based on fear of foreigners and fear of other cultures. It's not like the Wolfman who like can't control his impulses, or Dracula there's something alluring about this, handsome man, like it instead of the Mummy is almost the least relatable of the monsters because they do just turn him into this is a scary foreign guy from another religion and another part of the world, and so this had an opportunity to kind of turn that on its head a little bit and give it more depth, and then didn't.
They didn't. So
and just turned it into a white guy.
Well, when we revisit the concept, because we are going to have to pick up some of the threads in this film, we can try and reshape it into something more interesting. But we definitely do have sort of a contrast between like the two sort of ideas of where horror comes from. Is horror something that we're afraid of that's external from us, or something in ourselves that frightens us, right? Yes. Like Dracula is about sex in large part, right? Vampire lore is about people's fear of their own sexuality and their own urges and desires, which is completely absent from Dracula Untold. Yes. I will defend Dracula Untold a little bit, that I think that just as a generic sort of fantasy action film, it's fine. It's like a 2 out of 5, whereas The Mummy is to me a 1 star. It's practically irredeemable as a movie.
I think we're opposite on this. I'm a 2-star for The Mummy and a 1 star for Dracula Untold. Check the Letterboxd.
But in any case, I think that they take Dracula and they remove all choices from him. Basically, every bad thing that he does, it's not just that he does it for someone else. He does it at someone else's urging.
Yes,
like he feels like a complete ping pong ball. And the coolest thing he does is you and I both like that he makes a big Kamehameha or whatever out of bats.
Yeah, that's fun.
But yeah, we can toss it. I was going to maybe suggest that we try to keep Dracula Untold, but
I mean, look, here's the thing.
Just as a challenge, as a narrative challenge. Increase the value of our IP.
It's so non-essential that we could start throwing in references, again, kind of like the Incredible Hulk, where like now all of a sudden the Abomination is back and like they're actually kind of picking up or how they use General Ross, from that. But other than that, you don't really have to have seen it. Like we could, if necessary, look back to it, because the thing is, we don't have to contradict it because everything that happens in Dracula Untold, I don't think needs to be any part of our Dracula movie.
Right.
I don't think we need an origin story necessarily for our Dracula.
There's been 600 years since that happened. He could be a completely different guy now. I mean, I also kind of enjoyed Charles Dance as the sort of vampire master in that movie, as the guy playing, Dracula in the Dracula movie. But yeah, we can toss out, like, I almost thought about treating it more like the Ang Lee Hulk is to the MCU, where it's not at all canonical, but also the Incredible Hulk is as much a sequel to the Lee Hulk as it is, its own film.
Right.
They don't repeat anything from that movie, and they kind of pick up the character relationships where it left off.
Yeah.
But also, we don't have to do anything, so fuck it.
Yeah. Well, if
they
it feels right,
we'll do it. This movie. If we decide we want to cycle back to it, we'll do it.
I had 2 other core ideas for the future of the franchise that I just want to throw out there, and we can adjust as we go. but they're straight from The Mummy, and so I want to cover them on this episode. And the first is, I think we could build our Infinity Saga, at least loosely, around the phrase that gets repeated a few times in this film, including the opening quote, "Death is a doorway." They come back to that a few times. They say, "Death is a doorway. What is beyond the veil of death?" And I think that is an interesting question for a horror universe to explore, is what is death in this world? We want to make sure that death has stakes, but we've also sort of removed the stakes of death by someone that can bring people back. And so I think if we make death as a doorway sort of our thesis statement, and sort of the thread that combines our films, maybe the thing we end up building to is a sort of version of hell. Not as in like a generic, just like, oh, a bunch of CGI demons going around, but if we build an actual doorway to death that even our monsters are afraid of, and that our monsters are seeking immortality partly because they know what's beyond the veil of death and they're afraid of it. And our mortal characters are afraid of dying because, of course, they die and they don't come back. But then you've also got your monsters trying to control the concept of death because they know how bad hell truly is and that they are damned to it. Which kind of brings me to my second idea, which is how to fix Nick. How to fix our Tom Cruise character. First of all, better dialogue. Give this man a character. Like, let's actually write him like a human being.
It's been 5 years. A lot will have happened to him.
Well, and I think
he can be basically a new guy now.
And I think what we do, I think we can sort of kickstart the arc, like sort of reset his arc that they were trying to do, which is clearly this is an asshole, a thief, a womanizer that will learn to sacrifice, right? That's sort of his mini arc in this movie. Not very satisfying, though. I think we pick up on him 5 years later. Where we left him in this movie was he was going to seek out a cure, right? And a way to undo the curse. Well, what if he found, or maybe he didn't even find the cure, but he was looking for it and realized that if he cured himself, he would be mortal again. And now that he has set inside him and he understands life and death, he's seen behind the veil and he knows if I cure myself, then I can die. And then my soul is damned forever because I was previously a body for Set, right? And so he's decided, I'm too afraid to be cured. I don't actually want to find this because I don't want to die because I've seen what's on the other side. And so where we find him actually is being an asshole because he's immortal. And now we almost kind of reset his arc where he is our Tony Stark character, except he's a little bit more aloof. He's just kind of settled himself up somewhere. He's maybe rich. He's used his powers to manipulate things. And now he's just sort of living his life. And he's, surrounded himself by hot babes and he's going to resorts and, he's just a big time mover. And he's not really using his powers because he's afraid of them. He's still got the evil inside him that we can address some ways. And at some point when our characters need to go to him, maybe because they need someone revived or they hear about what happened in the first movie and they need his help, he's afraid to touch it because he's afraid to touch this death aspect. He's afraid to touch this evil inside him. And he says, no, I can't do that because it's too dangerous for me. I've seen what's over there and I don't want anything to do with it. And his arc is going to be really learning the sacrifice of, I may go to hell, but I can save people while doing it. And that's sort of his growth over our 3-phase thing. Again, similar to the Tony Stark arc, but we've already given the powers of a god like right away.
All right, I think that's interesting. I kind of have a counter pitch to you
about
what to do with this character. I think the other way to take this is because I'm uninterested in this character as we've met him at all.
Yes.
And so I kind of want to decide this is sort of his prologue and will accept the sort of growth that we've been told that he's had. And he's now a more selfless person. And he is now on the path to becoming a hero. And my suggestion would be that we let him follow that path. But what this means to him now is he stopped looking for a cure because so long as Set is in his body, no one else can release Set. So he is now hanging on to this force of death. his goal is simply to contain it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not defeating Set. He's just kind of holding him prisoner in his body. And so he is, in an effort to try and keep that danger contained, is trying to isolate himself as much as possible. Mm-hmm. He only has Jake Johnson as sort of his minion to go and do stuff out in the world when he has to. And so what our characters will have to do at some point is they're going to be looking for him, because the other, whatever our main evil force, whatever our sort of we decide our villain is also looking for him, because he is the key to the door to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think that he should be the lead of another movie. I kind of want to, because he's basically God now. And I think
unless we find a way to nerf him, and we could make a mummy movie where he's not the bad mummy, and, try to fix what this doesn't do with the mummy lore. But that's debatable. We can talk about that later. Probably wouldn't be in phase 1 anyway.
Okay. So I feel like what we should do now is come up with some sort of compromise as to what we're going to do. I'll be honest, I think that the solution to what we want to do with the mummy might be something that we find while we're working out the stories for the intervening.
Yeah.
Because I think that each of these films still needs to have its own beginning and middle and end, right?
Yep.
Each have their own ideas. And then it's just what we're going to sprinkle over top of it that's going to lead us to what are we imagining we're going to be doing, just like the MCU, like phase 1 is 6 films that culminates in our first crossover.
Yes.
I think
so.
That is likely where we're going to want to pick up the mummy again.
Yes, I think, maybe we have a post-credit stinger or something with him, but I don't think, I think in our crossover, which I kind of think, as we're coming up with the villains, I sort of think the first villain of our Avengers 1 should probably be Dracula.
Yeah.
I think Dracula is the big bad, not the overarching Thanos big bad, but
like
your
Loki
big bad is Dracula. And we get Dracula more in the mix there. And that's when whoever is in our movie is going to have to go to Tom Cruise and be like, we need you, or something like that, or he'll just get involved somehow, or they need Set, or they need, something like that.
This will be an interesting time for me to reveal that this probably has to do with having been like 14 or whatever when it came out. That movie Van Helsing?
Yes.
It's not good. But it does kind of rock.
It's fun. It's a nice little metal video of a movie.
And there is a degree to which I feel like I want to borrow a little bit of the sort of the way the characters interact with each other in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody who's listening who has not seen the 2005 Van Helsing movie, which was basically Universal's attempt to do a dark universe in a single film. Hugh Jackman plays Van Helsing, a monster hunter who, over the course of the movie, has to do battle with Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dracula, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, actually, in the beginning of that film all at once. And Dracula is trying to use... Dracula helps to make Frankenstein's monster, and he's trying to use them to control this army of werewolves to take over the world. Listen, the details are stupid. But the idea of Dracula as sort of this old world evil who has been working on a plan for a really long time, but whose scope is maybe just really earthly, right? But he's never been, he hasn't personally been beyond the veil of hell, right? He's a servant of the devil.
And I think he may also be afraid of what lies beyond there.
Sure.
Which is why he wants his immortality.
So there's something that we can work with. The idea that I like the idea of him. And so the mummy now becomes I guess he does kind of become, he still is sort of our Iron Man figure.
I think
it doesn't all have to be 1-to-1.
I also kind of think, again, Tom Cruise is a good star. Tom Cruise is a good anchor star. And I think he is bad in this movie because he was written bad. But I think there is an upside to making him our anchor character in the long run. I think he can carry it. If we're looking for someone to carry a franchise.
Tom Cruise was...
Obviously, Tom Cruise can do it.
He's the best movie star alive.
Yes.
Which is just so remarkable how little I invested him in this movie.
Yes.
I don't think it's ever happened before.
I think we can fix him.
I'm sure we can
fix him.
Well, I think we just have to let Tom Cruise be a little bit more Tom Cruise.
Yes, and we need to give him dialogue and a person to be. I think we build, and then maybe our big bad is even, I mean, we only see the briefest of glimpses of Set at the very beginning as Set sort of possesses our lady mummy for the first time. I think it might be cool to have maybe Set, if not be our Thanos, be like in that realm where we don't actually see, we've basically follow up from this glimpse we saw at the beginning of the first movie and then see it at the climax of our saga. Again, I don't want to, I like the idea of, even though the mummy is bad, treating it as the first film in a legacy franchise. I think we still have to pay it respect in ways that fixes retroactively a lot of the problems.
So we have introduced the big villain of the franchise in this film. And
in
this
the opening scene.
In the opening scene of the film. That's good.
Yeah.
And so now we also have the opportunity at the end of our sort of first phase, our first chapter of this, we can extend the utility of Nick Morton as a... Morton?
I just have Nick written down.
Nick,
I just wrote
as a
Nick.
character. I think at the end of this first section, the curse is lifted and he's now a human being.
Okay.
But in doing so, unwittingly, he has increased the level of danger to the world from Set, and somehow in the way that it's done.
And I don't think, I mean, we'll obviously talk about this more, but I don't think we should reset his powers to 0. I think we should, so that we don't completely throw away the ending of the mummy, he should still retain some sort of mummy power. I don't think we should completely just be like, okay, he's a normal human again. Even if we exorcise Set from him, or maybe we don't. There's also the possibility of we leave Set inside him, and the thing that triggers maybe at the end of our Dracula movie, our first Avengers, is then Set is loosed. Maybe that's like, and that leads us into phase 2.
All right, these are some things to think about because, I mean, we're starting to run out of time where we want to put our first episode.
Right.
So we have a lot of food for thought here. Where we have to close out today is this is the way that we're going to lift the veil a little bit about how this podcast is made. After this, we'll be recording them 2 at a time, and we'll be releasing them we'll be getting together once a month to record 2 episodes and releasing those semi-monthly. We will have to decide what the next 2 films are in the Dark Universe saga. Each of us is going to take the lead on generating the story, cast, director, putting together the shape of one film. Then we come back in a month or whenever we next record, and we pitch each other the ideas that we've generated for the next film. So right now what you and I have to do, Dalton, is decide what movie each of us is going to go home and sort of break down to pitch to the other when we return, and which one comes first. So the obvious thing to do would be originally the Dark Universe was slated to have, after the Mummy would have been, I'm not sure if this is the order of it, but I think it would have been Javier Bardem as the Wolfman.
Yep.
And then there was going to be the Invisible Man, although we're no longer interested in working with Johnny Depp.
Yes, we'll recast the Invisible Man. It never featured in a film, so easy to recast.
Also, invisible.
Yeah.
Now, the trouble there is that Lee Whannell's Invisible Man.
That's the thing. So whoever's doing the Invisible Man has
fucking incredible.
Yeah, we both love that movie. And so finding a new take on the Invisible Man, why don't we do this? Because for our first episodes, the other one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I don't think we would want that to be the next movie. No. I think we want to create some distance.
I think that's like maybe 5.
Yeah. What if we throw Frankenstein in the mix? Because
Do you think you have a take on Frankenstein?
I might have. I don't have one ready to go, but I think I have enough of a conception of the role I want him to play in our universe that maybe I could do it.
It's a challenge because of all of these characters, he's the one who's he's been done the most number of times.
Yes.
In and out of Universal's library.
And it's really hard to do something new with Frankenstein that still lives up, I think, to the message and the simplicity of the original story.
You're going to have to make a lot of use of the world that's been constructed in this film in order to give it a unique identity. You have the Spider-Man Homecoming job. Everyone knows Frankenstein. You have to figure out what makes the story of Frankenstein specific to this universe. If you don't want to do it, I don't have an idea either. If you don't want it, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'll do the Wolfman.
You know what? I'm going to stick with Frankenstein. I'm going to try to crack it. I also think you could come up with a very good Wolfman pitch. And it's not just because you have the beard and I don't.
I am her suit.
I will take Frankenstein. Here's the thing that I also realized while watching this movie is I think the fun of the dark universe that this movie doesn't get into is taking these iconic films that all of the Universal monsters are just trope city now. They've been done for literally 100 years. We know all of the Frankenstein tropes. We know all of the Dracula tropes. We know all the tropes. I think the fun is inserting someone else's tropes in someone else's movie and, mashing the different Lego sets together. Like, one thing I was thinking of when I was reconceptualizing Prodigium is like, what if this like weird like extraterrestrial alien guy showed up in an otherwise Dracula movie? That's kind of fun to me. Like, taking something we're all familiar with and seeing it in the wrong film. And so, like you were saying, my thing with Frankenstein is building off the world we have. It might be fun to have elements of that are familiar to the viewer, but never in a Frankenstein movie, because we know the Frankenstein beats. We haven't seen the Wolfman beats in a Frankenstein film.
I like this direction, and I think we should. I think we should run with that, and when we meet back up in 2 to 4 weeks to start the podcast proper. All this has been prologue, just like The Mummy 2017.
Yes, we're figuring out what our dark universe is, and we want you to come along for the ride as we literally map out an entire MCU's worth of films about horror monsters.
Yeah, we hope you'll join us for this journey, as we're really just getting into what's going to make this exciting and fun for the two of us, which is to try and sell each other on entire movies, and then build it into a cohesive whole that will make us each $1 billion.
And then hopefully in the future, perhaps even have some guests who can pitch us their own Dark Universe films.
That's true. If you've been listening to this and you think you have an idea as to where a particular movie or monster, if you want to pitch us a chapter of the Dark Universe, go ahead and send us a DM.
We'll probably set up an email eventually or something. We
probably will, but since we don't have that yet, we might as well do our follow us sign off here. I'm on Twitter at Dylan Roth. That's DYLANROTH. Dylan like Bob, Roth like David Lee. Dalton, you are on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all the socials as Dalton Deschain. That is DALTON DESCHAIN. And we have projects. You can read my horror comic, Monocle, that I publish on my Patreon at patreon.com/Dalton Deschain, and check out my band, Dalton Deschain and the Traveling Show.
You can find all of my reviews of recent and upcoming films and television shows by following my Twitter or checking out my Muckrack site on muckrack.com/Dylan-Roth. And you can listen to my band, No Jersey. We are at No Jersey, No Problem across social media.
And follow us on Letterboxd.
Absolutely. Roll on Letterboxd under our real names.
This is a collaborative process, so please send us your ideas. We will not necessarily pay you or tell Universal that you gave them to us. And by DMing or tweeting them at us, you forfeit your right to use them in any monetary capacity.
But you should still do it.
But you should do it, because it'll be fun.
It's great exposure for you.
Yes. Really good exposure.
If we remember to tell anybody that it was your idea.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, everyone. And we don't have a clever sign-off for the show yet, but we'll probably have one at some point.
Yeah. And now you're scared. Now you're afraid of the dark universe. We'll work on it. Bye, everyone.